I'm pressed flat against the cold concrete floor behind a stack of fertilizer pallets in aisle 49B. The emergency lights cut out 10 minutes ago, leaving me in absolute, suffocating darkness. The only sound in the entire million-square-foot facility is my own breath catching in my throat, and that other sound. It's a wet, rhythmic slapping against the polished cement, like raw meat being dropped over and over again, slow and deliberate. It's coming from the north end of the aisle. I'm clutching my radio so hard my knuckles are splitting, even though the static hissed out 20 minutes ago right before the main breakers blew. The slapping stops. Silence. Then, from right above me, high up in the steel racking, a voice whispers my name. It's not my boss. It's not security. It's my own voice, recordings of me talking to myself earlier that night, stitched together into a grotesque mimicry. To understand why I am currently paralyzed with terror in a pitch-black warehouse, listening to something where my voice like a mask, we need to go back 3 weeks to when I signed the contract. The job posting seemed too good to be true, which, in hindsight, is the reddest of flags. $25 an hour just to walk around an empty warehouse from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m.? I was desperate, though. My student loans were hemorrhaging interest, and my landlord was threatening eviction, so I didn't ask too many questions. The facility was located about 40 miles outside the city limits, a massive concrete scab in the middle of endless scrubland. They called it Site Omega. It was one of those overflow distribution centers for a major online retailer, meant to hold excess inventory before the holiday rush. The first night I pulled into the lot, it was empty save for a single security shack at the gate. The guard gave me a temporary badge and didn't make eye contact. The place was gargantuan. The sheer scale of it was oppressive once you got up close to the tilt-up concrete walls. Inside, past the employee lockers, it smelled intensely of ozone, dust, and corrugated cardboard. The air was stale, recycled too many times. My job title was Asset Protection Specialist, which was corporate speak for night watchman with a clipboard. My duties were mind-numbingly simple: walk the perimeter grid of the warehouse floor every 2 hours, check the fire exits to make sure they were secured, and ensure the automated high bay storage systems weren't overheating. The facility was bustling with robots during the day, but at night, the entire system shut down to charge. It was just me and $50 million of inventory sitting in the dark. The silence was the heaviest thing about the job. It wasn't a peaceful silence, it was a pressurized, waiting kind of silence. You could hear the building settle, the massive metal joists popping like distant gunfire in the rafters as the desert temperature dropped outside. The first week was uneventful. Boring, even. I listened to podcasts in one earbud to keep from going crazy with boredom, tracing the yellow safety lines on the floor with my flashlight beam. It was around the start of the second week when things started getting weird. I was doing my 2 a.m. rounds near the hazmat section, Sector G, way in the back corner. That's where they kept the industrial chemicals and pallets of dense liquids. The air always smelled faintly metallic back there. I was checking a tag on a fire extinguisher when I heard a distinct clang from way up in the racking. It sounded like a metal pallet hitting a support beam hard. I froze, shining my heavy-duty flashlight up into the gloom. The racks there go up 60 feet, dizzyingly high. Nothing. Just rows and rows of shrink-wrapped pallets vanishing into the darkness above the reach of my light. I figured it was thermal contraction. Big metal structures make noise when they cool down at night. I'd worked construction back in the day. I knew buildings breathed and shifted. I noted it in my log as settling noise, Sector G, and moved on. I'm a practical guy. I don't jump to ghosts. If a noise happens in a warehouse, it's usually rats or plumbing. A few nights later, it was the automated pickers. These are massive robotic lifts that run on tracks between the highest shelves, retrieving items without human intervention. They're supposed to be docked and fully powered down between midnight and 5 a.m. I was walking past aisle 20, near the center of the facility, when I heard the distinct hydraulic whine of one of them engaging. The sound echoed sharply in the cavernous space. I stopped dead. The motion sensor should have picked me up and kept the machinery locked out for safety. I watched down the long corridor of shelves as Picker Unit 7 slowly slid out of its charging dock. It didn't have any orders queued on the main system. It just slid on its rails to the dead center of the aisle, stopped, and then slowly raised its lifting forks about 30 feet into the air. And then it just sat there. Hung there in the dark, humming. My heart gave a little jump, I'll admit. Being crushed by rogue machinery in the middle of the night is a real fear. I jogged back to the main control panel in the glass-walled office near the loading docks. The screen showed Unit 7 as offline/charging. It shouldn't have been moving. I manually reset the system from the console. Out on the floor, the picker lowered its forks with a loud hiss and returned to its dock. A glitch. A software bug in the scheduling matrix. That's what I told myself. These systems are complex, they hiccup. But standing there in that brightly lit glass office, looking out over the acres of cavernous, dark floor, I couldn't shake the feeling that the machine hadn't moved because of a glitch. It felt watching it, like it had moved because something had climbed onto it, something that wanted a better vantage point from the high steel. That glitch with the picker unit gnawed at me for the rest of the week. I spent the next 3 nights camped out in the security office, staring at the bank of CCTV monitors instead of doing my rounds. I told myself I was being diligent, waiting to catch a software error in the act, but deep down, I knew I was terrified to step back out onto that endless concrete floor. The problem was, the cameras were useless. The facility was too big. There were huge black zones between the aisles where the lighting didn't reach, pools of shadow big enough to hide a semi-truck, let alone whatever my panicked brain was conjuring up. And half the time, the feeds would fritz out, dissolving into static grain for 10 seconds at a time before snapping back to an empty view. By Friday of the 3rd week, the isolation was starting to rot my nerves. When you go 8 hours a night without hearing another human voice, your mind starts to eat itself. I was jumpy, exhausted, and drinking enough bad office coffee to vibrate through walls. I knew I had to get back out on the floor. I couldn't just sit in the office collecting a paycheck. Eventually, a supervisor would check the RFID logs on my patrol scanner and see I hadn't moved in days. At 11 p.m., I grabbed my flashlight, cinched my radio holster tight, and stepped out of the office. The change in atmosphere was immediate. The air out on the floor felt colder, thicker than before. That metallic ozone smell had ripened into something else, something underneath the dust that smelled faintly like wet copper, like old pennies left in water. I stuck to the main transit corridors at first, staying away from the deep, narrow storage aisles. My footsteps slapped too loudly on the concrete, echoing away into the dark and bouncing back a fraction of a second later than they should have. It created this staggering effect, like I was being followed by someone walking perfectly in sync with me. Every time I stopped abruptly to catch the echo off guard, there was only silence. A thick, heavy silence that felt like it was holding its breath. Around 1:30 a.m., I was forced to go deep. My scanner indicated a mandatory check-in point way back in Sector G, the hazmat area where I'd heard that first loud clang weeks ago. I almost skipped it, but I needed this job. I wasn't going to get fired for cowardice. Sector G was the darkest part of the warehouse. The emergency lighting there was sparse because the high bay shelving cast immense shadows. As I walked down aisle 45, the beam of my flashlight cut through dust motes dancing in the stillness. I stopped. Up ahead, about 50 feet down the aisle, something was wrong with the silhouette of the racking. I moved closer, keeping the light steady with both hands. 3 pallets on the ground level had been decimated. These weren't standard cardboard boxes, these were heavy-duty plastic drums strapped to wooden skids, shrink-wrapped with industrial-grade plastic. The wrap hadn't been cut with a knife. It was shredded, stretching and torn until it snapped, hanging in ragged plastic ribbons. I stepped closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. 2 of the blue plastic drums were tipped over. The caps had been chewed off, not unscrewed. The thick, hard plastic rims were jagged, mangled by jaw pressure that seemed impossible. A thick, viscous purple liquid, some kind of industrial lubricant, according to the label, was pooled on the concrete, slowly oozing toward the center drain. The copper smell was overpowering here, mixing with the chemical reek of the lubricant. No machine did this. A forklift accident would have crushed the drums, not gnawed the tops off. Raccoons or rats couldn't tear through industrial polymers. I unholstered my radio, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I needed to call this in. Even if it was just leaving a voicemail for the day shift manager, I needed to hear another voice, even a recorded one. I keyed the mic dispatch. This is Site Omega Night Watch. I've got a situation in Sector G, major product damage. Looks like animal intrusion, but it's big. Over. I let go of the button. Instead of the usual squelch of static or the beep of the repeater acknowledging the transmission, there was just dead air. Then, a sound slowly filtered through the speaker. It started low, a wet, clicking rhythm, like someone snapping their fingers inside a mouthful of saliva. Click-clack. 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 I stared at the radio in horror. Hello? Is someone on this channel? The clicking stopped. For a terrible, stretching moment, there was silence. Then, a voice came through the tiny speaker. It was distorted, crackly, and quiet, as if the person speaking was right up against the microphone. Major product damage, the voice whispered. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't just repeating my words. It was my voice. It sounded exactly like me, but flat, drained of all the adrenaline and fear I'd just felt. It sounded dead. Who is this? I yelled into the radio, spinning around, shining my light frantically into the towering racks around me. This isn't funny, man. Get off the channel. The radio crackled again. The voice was louder now, less whispery, testing the pitch. Looks like animal intrusion, it said, perfectly mimicking the slight tremor I'd had in my voice moments ago. Then, it added something new. A sound I hadn't made. A low, guttural sound that started as a groan and twisted upward into a sharp, metallic screech that made me drop the radio. It clattered onto the concrete. As it hit the floor, all the lights in Sector G, the emergency fluorescents, the exit signs, everything simultaneously winked out. Absolute darkness crashed down on me. The only light left in the entire world was the frantic, shaking beam of my flashlight. And in the split second before I turned and ran, the beam swept across the racking 40 feet up. Something was clinging to the outside of the steel shelves. I only saw it for a fragment of a second. It was pale, sickeningly hairless, and long. Too long. It was stretched out against the metal beams like wet dough, its limbs bent at sickening angles to grip the supports. It didn't have a face that I could see, just a smooth indentation where a head should be, turned toward me. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My brain simply short-circuited into pure animal panic. I spun around and bolted toward the main corridor, abandoning the radio, abandoning everything but the primal need to get to light. Behind me, in the sudden dark, I heard a heavy, what thought as something massive drop from the high steel onto the concrete floor. My lungs were burning like I'd inhaled broken glass. I didn't look back as I sprinted away from Sector G. The sounds behind me were enough motivation. It wasn't running. It was a wet, rhythmic slapping against the concrete, heavy and fast, like a giant slab of raw meat being flapping against the floor. It was gaining on me. The beam of my flashlight jerked wildly, illuminating flashes of endless shelving and terrifying patches of darkness. I needed cover, somewhere dense enough to break its line of sight. I saw the placard for aisle 49B ahead, the agriculture section. Pallets of fertilizer sacks stacked 20 feet high, dense and heavy. I dove into the aisle, scrambling between two towering stacks of ammonium nitrate sacks, kicking up dust that stung my eyes. I huddled in the gap behind them, pressing my back against the cold concrete, trying to silence my gasping breath. And that's when the lights cut out completely, plunging the entire facility into that suffocating, subterranean blackness. This brings us back to the moment I started with. The slapping sound stopped right at the entrance to my aisle. Silence stretched until the copperpenny stench of the thing wafted over the top of the pallets. Then came the whisper from the high steel directly above me. Major product damage, it mimicked, using that flat, dead version of my voice. I clamped my hands over my mouth to keep from screaming. Dust rained down on my hair. It was descending through the racking, moving with a sickeningly fluid grace for something so large. I could hear its limbs gripping the metal supports, the steel groaning under a weight that shouldn't have been there. It dropped to the floor on the other side of the fertilizer stack I was hiding behind. The impact shook the ground beneath me. I squeezed my eyes shut, as if not seeing it would make it not real. The smell was overpowering now, a thick chemical miasma that made me gag into my hands. "Is someone on this channel?" it asked. The voice was closer now, right at the corner of the pallet stack. It was testing the emotional range, injecting a terrifying, robotic curiosity into my own words. I knew if I stayed there, I would die in that dark corner. The adrenaline surge hit me with clarifying force. The fire exit. There was an emergency push-bar door on the north wall, past aisle 50. It was maybe 150 feet away in total darkness. It would set off the building-wide alarms, but I didn't care. Noise was good. Noise might scare it. I took a breath that tasted of fertilizer dust and copper, gripped my heavy flashlight like a club, and bolted from cover. I didn't turn the light on. I ran blind, arms pumping, trusting my memory of the main corridor's layout. Behind me, a sound erupted that wasn't mimicry. It was a high-pitched, vibrating shriek of pure predatory rage that sounded like metal tearing. The slapping sound resumed, faster than before. It was skittering now, its limbs moving in a frenzied blur against the concrete. I could feel the air pressure change at my back as it closed the distance. The reek of it washed over me. I saw the faint, self-illuminated red glow of the exit sign ahead, floating in the void. It was 20 feet away. 10. Something cold and wet brushed the back of my neck just as I threw my entire body weight into the crash bar of the door. The door flew open with a metallic screech, spilling me out onto the gravel of the exterior loading dock. The cool night desert air hit my face like salvation. An instant later, the deafening, oscillating blast of the facility's fire alarm shattered the silence, echoing across the empty scrubland. I scrambled backward on the gravel, scraping my palms raw, staring at the open doorway. The interior of the warehouse was a cavern of flashing strobe lights from the alarm system. In the strobing bursts of light, I saw it standing just inside the doorway. It was huge, easily 8 feet tall, standing hunched on 4 multi-jointed limbs. Its skin was the color of spoiled milk, slick and translucent enough that I could see dark veins pulsing beneath the surface. It didn't have a face. Its head was just a smooth, elongated dome of cartilage that ended in a vertical slit where a mouth should be. As the strobe lights flashed, the slit pulsed open, and I saw rows of needle-like bone structures inside. It recoiled from the noise of the alarm, shrieking back at the klaxons with that same metallic tear sounds. It took one step toward the doorway, toward me, its pale form illuminated in jagged bursts of light. Then, it seemed to think better of it. It turned with impossible speed and scuttled back into the darkness of the warehouse, vanishing between the aisles. I didn't stop running until I reached the main county road, 2 miles away. A trucker found me walking down the center line, dazed and bleeding from my hands. The police kicked in the doors at Site Omega an hour later. They found the destroyed chemical drums in Sector G. They found my radio crushed flat on the floor. They found weird residue on the high steel beams that the lab boys couldn't identify. The official report said vandals had broken in, puffed industrial solvents, and gone on a rampage. They said the stress of the job caused me to have a breakdown. I never went back. I left town the next day. I work days now in a busy call center where there's never a moment of silence. I need the noise. I need the constant hum of other people to drown out the quiet spaces in my own head. Because the hardest part isn't the memory of what it looked like or the smell of blood and copper. The hardest part is that sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment and I drop something, or I mutter to myself while doing dishes, I find myself freezing, waiting for an echo that doesn't come right away. Waiting for my own voice to drift back to me from the shadowed corner of the ceiling, slightly changed, practicing the sounds I just made.